Go.
Craig Bubble.
Andrew Taylor.
I'm Salisbury.
So I'm Eva from the campaign group Guerns Against Discrimination, which came together earlier this year to push for the anti-discrimination legislation and to raise awareness in the community of discrimination on the island. With the proposals now passed unanimously, it's imperative for us that the next elected candidates are dedicated to ensuring that the law is written and passed within the proposed timeline.
I'm Netty from Liberate, and I'm going to ask 2 questions, one each. The news slightly more difficult than the other.
So my question for you is, for the legislation to be effective, do you think that people need to be informed and businesses need access to training?
I think they do need to be informed, and we've had this discussion upstairs actually, and I think it needs to be sort of fed in and people get the opportunity to learn the law and that they're not and just I think before it comes into play start introducing bits of it prior to its when it's fully instated.
Yes, probably slightly different to Craig. I kind of think it should be, I don't think it should be drip-fed in. I think that is going to cause me far more headaches in business than actually just having it all there. I can read through everything. Otherwise, my fear is that it's just going to kind of slip and slip and slip. And whoever's at the end of this discrimination legislation could end up with a few delays, could be facing a huge long distance through a couple of political terms.
Yeah, well, I supported the discrimination legislation clearly, and the amendments especially that brought things forward, which I was pleased about. Of course, we all wanted it done all at once. Understood where ESS is coming from. There's a lot of work, legislation needs to be done, and I think we need to make sure that it's managed properly. Otherwise, we're often the states is accused of trying to do everything all at once, and then nothing happens at all. So I think we've come up with a good plan, and we need to actually make it happen.
Can I add on that? Because I did say upstairs that I would be in preference of seeing, even if there was a 1-year delay, but everything all came in at once. As a way, I'd take a little bit more time, wait long enough. But if we look at another year and we can actually put it all into place and it can all come through, that would be my aim.
Well, the full plan
but I wouldn't be
it's more than just the next 2 years. It's covered.
Yeah, it's a hell of a long way. But if we sign up to it and actually to wait years and years and years.
But it probably will all wait till 4 years. So we can do it that. There's so much to do.
It'd be something that would come through the GBTA, I think, for us. Would it? They sort of introduce it through the GBTA or something on the construction industry forum to be able for us to get it down right how it's supposed to be in that industry. It's quite difficult when you're doing a physical job, and I mean I don't want to discriminate against anyone with disability, but it's how do we implement that into a physical role like plastering and rendering.
Well, some areas will be complicated, so just disability discrimination will be something where employers have to consider the allowances they need to make. There's other things like racism, sexual orientation, it should be any issue whatsoever. It's just like make sure that you don't do it. Obvious, you know.
Sorry, I'm going to have to ask the next question then, Will. This particular characteristic isn't in there at the moment. It's likely that it's going to come back as trans as a particular characteristic.
Yeah.
And the question that I want to ask, and it's sort of the elephant in the room, as it were, in regards to the discrimination legislation, when it comes up, how will you respond to the challenge of trans people in single-sex spaces? And how to legislate for that? I think start this out.
Can you repeat the question again?
In regards to the discrimination legislation, how will you respond to trans people in single-sex spaces?
I'll start.
You start leading, and
I mean, I might put my foot in here, but I don't think it should kind of be a non-issue. And I'm not sure which single-sex spaces you'd be referred to. If I use toilets, would I be on the right kind of area? I mean, when you go to France, everyone uses the same toilets anyway. Like, who cares? I'd almost be annoyed that it has to become an issue because it doesn't really even think about it. We just put toilet above the door and we can all use it. I'm sorry about simplifying it. That's me.
Well, I agree with Andy. Yeah. It shouldn't be the issue it is. I can understand there are certain views that are concerns, but I think those are concerns that are totally unrelated to to trans people. It's people who are predators, and that's the thing that you deal with, not trans people who are just trying to go about their own lives.
It's always a fear about the completely wrong thing.
It's either something that you sounds funny, but if you either go to the female toilets, I'd say it as, or you introduce a third toilet. Does that make sense? It doesn't work, and I think that's down to sort of working with sort of people in that have that to get what you really want. Do you know what I mean? And then going back and sort of debating it with the states.
But it will come up next term.
Yeah, I can imagine.
If they
I don't want to put my comment in because I was getting nothing.
if they didn't opt in for the third
But then the thing is, if you put a third toilet in, you're kind of like you're almost discriminating against. Does that make sense?
Well, I'd certainly be annoyed there wasn't a queue for the third toilet.
If they don't introduce a third toilet or all user toilets, would you be fine to vote pro for trans women to use the women's toilets or women's change rooms? Vice versa. So if they don't go as far as the ideal of all use for everyone, are you fine with obviously with having women's toilets and men's toilets as it stands, but trans people as they identify using their identified sort of spaces?
Yeah, that's
trans
probably
women
It's because the issue is never around whether you're trans, whatever you are. It's about certain individuals who might use that space and will do that anyway. Indeed, they do.
I struggle with the terminology. I always find it's that. So,
it's confusing for a lot of people.
Yeah,
it's normal.
But I think I had a question today about same-sex marriage. Why should it be a discussion? That's the
It shouldn't be because it's law now.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Gary Collins. I'm a candidate in the 2020 elections.
So I'm Eva, and I'm from the campaign group Guerns Against Discrimination, which came together earlier this year to push for the anti-discrimination legislation and to raise awareness in the community of discrimination on the island. With the proposals now passed unanimously, it's imperative for us that the next elected candidates are dedicated to ensuring that the law is written and passed within the proposed timeline.
And I'm Netty from Liberate and Work and Wellbeing
So my question is, for the legislation to be effective, do you think that people need to be informed and businesses need access to training?
Yeah, I think for businesses it's a little bit scary that they're faced, and that's why we're seeing some of the opposition to it. But it does need to happen, and I think it's a culture change, and they have to accept that. But we really need to hold their hand and actually read them in that these things aren't scary, but people have rights. And as a government, we're totally wrong the fact that this hasn't happened. I was in the States between 2012 and 2016 when I voted for the first proposals to come through, and I'm very disappointed that it's taken, all this time for it to actually come through, and the States have really only approved a framework. And it's actually what's stopping that, because a lot of this legislation is out there. Are we lacking that legal resource that we need to actually get more resources into the legal side to be able to deliver that? Because a lot of devs are saying, well, we're all supportive, but but it's actually, well, you need to come up with the extra £100,000, £200,000 to put an extra lawyer in place to get this done. So for me, I am very supportive, and that's one of the reasons why I'm very clear in my manifesto that we need this legislation passed. If that answers your question,
yes,
hopefully it does.
So my question, and it's very much been the elephant in the room, it's regarding trans as a characteristic. It's not in there at the moment, but we know it's going to come back up again. And one of the biggest things that always comes up in debate is, in regards to the discrimination legislation, how will you respond to the challenge of trans people in single-sex spaces? And when we say single-sex spaces, we're talking toilets, refuge space,
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Again, it's very difficult subject to try and get across to a lot of people, but actually a lot of facilities need to come almost sort of gender neutral, and have a lot of places that actually men and women can use, and that fully understanding again of culture. But you know, I sort of see that, you know, parents with young children, and it gets to that age of where your children are, you're almost afraid to go in to bring your children into certain areas. So I think again it's that engaging with businesses local, and again a bit of hand-holding by the government and all extra maybe funding to say these are the challenges, and almost actually to relax some of the planning laws which again are taking so long to get things approved, that actually we need to be proactive with that and try and help bridge the gap between the two.
So I run Quality Guerns, and what I'd like to know is, we've got to the stage where it's been approved we can have the legislation, but obviously as we go through into the next states, it's going to be these states that support it and actually enact it. So how will you support this legislation and make sure it gets on the statute books?
Yeah, for me, I've said quite clearly in my manifesto, I would love to be a disability champion. I think for them it's a key thing, you know, because for me, that's one of the things that I'm standing because of this, that actually I would love to be there, and for me it's raising the profile constantly battering the departments. I think whoever it is the disability champion should perhaps be on the employment social services side of it, because then you're actually on the inside. So I'm a little bit disappointed in Michelle. I understand there's a lot of things going on, but actually, thank you. There's a bit sort of noise outside. A little bit disappointed that some of this hasn't been done. But in the aspect that these states have had more money. When I came to government, we were facing a deficit from the previous government, and we came in with a £32 million deficit. And in 2016, when we left, we returned to a £20 million surplus. And unfortunately, this last 4 years, the states have been arguing about all sorts of things, and they put so much money into a capital pot, which they've not spent. Where actually, if you weren't going to spend it, some of that could have been left in the general revenue pot, and actually ease some of the third sector charitable work that are really suffering. Since the crash in 2008, 2007, 2008, external sponsorship is getting harder and harder to fundraise, and more charities and organisations are having to do more and more fundraising to generate the funds. I'm very heavily involved in sport, and I say half my time on fundraising. But if I wasn't fundraising, I could invest my time into running more programmes, getting more islanders, more active, more into sport and doing other things. And it's the same across a lot of these things. You know, a lot of guys there are spending a lot of time battering and arguing that we need this legislation in place, we need to do these things. And actually, instead of actually getting out there and helping from the community. So for me, it's absolutely vital. And again, I think we need all 38 to be day one. This is a priority. It needs to be identified. I think a lot of people have, but it's getting that from just talking about it to actually doing it. And then go back to the fundamental thing: do we just need a budget time for a 250 grand on the table? We need another lawyer just to concentrate on this.
And there's
what
other
do we
laws
need
as well that key into this. Like recently, I don't know if you saw Amendment 9, which is the birth certificate.
Yeah, about the names on birth certificate, which actually, again, is fundamental for me. I've never thought about that, but again, it's been highlighted. Actually, you know what? Why again are we behind the times in this? Some of the legislation is out there, and I know Guernsey loves to just delay things because then we can pick up things, but actually we should be proactive. If we know from a finance perspective, if we've got a law that's stopping the finance industry, it'll be changed overnight because we have support and actually one of them considered down the list a little bit. So I'm totally bored with that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm Eva from the campaign group Guerns Against Discrimination, which came together earlier this year to push for the anti-discrimination legislation to raise awareness in the community of discrimination on the island and the importance of educating ourselves on how to create a more inclusive society. And with that law now passed unanimously, with the proposals now passed unanimously, it is imperative for us that the next elected candidates are dedicated to ensuring that the law is written and passed within the proposed timeline and ensuring equality and equal opportunities.
And I'm Rex from Liberate, for those that don't know me.
Do you want to just say your names quickly so the public know who you are?
Well, I'm Jenny Tasker.
I'm Andy Cameron.
I'm Phil Smith.
So we're just both going to ask you each a question.
Right, okay.
So my question to you is, for the legislation to be effective, do you think that people need to be informed and businesses need access to training?
There are some aspects of it that when it is passed, and it hasn't come, of course, come to law yet, when it is all passed, then businesses may well need expertise to see how they can operate the parts of the legislation that applies to them. I would hope that we can reduce the timeline, because I'm particularly unhappy about the equal pay for equal work aspect of it, and other things too, because it seems a very, very long time to bring this in, and it'll be after the end of this next session, and that really is ludicrous.
I'd like to see us do that. I was previously working at Generali, and I think they were actually pretty on top of anti-discrimination things already. So I think there's probably quite a lot of businesses in Guernsey that are actually working their way towards that. I think I'd be surprised if there's many that aren't actually working their way towards it already. Really.
Yeah, I'd reiterate both their points. That Jenny's that we should speed up. There's no reason why we can't get it done, so let's do it. And then Andy's, there are some bigger firms that have this in place. Their HR departments are quite good, but because of the makeup of Guernsey, there's a lot of small businesses as well, and those small businesses are going to need a bit of help from the state's training in particular, and then understanding the legislation. If you haven't even got a HR team, you can't expect to regurgitate 600 pages of legislation. So yeah, I think we will need help.
One of the other things is mainly the law firms who were so anti certain aspects of the proposals, who really have a lot of expertise within them, and they shouldn't be, I think, going against some of the things that were proposed. Anyway, that's another. Sorry, Lexi.
Okay. This sort of the elephant in the room question I'm going to ask here, and in regards to the discrimination legislation. How will you respond to the challenge of trans people and single-sex spaces? Single-sex spaces, so we're talking about toilets, places like the refuges and those places. It's always been a challenge when the legislation has been debated, and I want to know sort of how you would go about the consultation and
well, it is something now that you've got to take into account without any doubt. But how we actually deal with aspects of buildings and facilities, that's something, again, I think that should come into the training. And people should be, those of you involved ought to be able to help people to see how they can move forward. Because certainly it's not right that people should be discriminated, whatever.
I think you move towards just universal toilets, really.
You have those in France.
The only other way is by creating further toilets. So I think just moving towards just a universal toilet space is probably the most easy, efficient way of doing it, really.
And so it's not an area I know a lot about, but my always aspect has always been we already work on a trust-based system. You know, if a man really wanted to go into a woman's toilet, he could. So I think it's a bit of an overreaction and just something we need to come to terms with as a society and start to, as our culture changes and we start to understand the issue better, then things will work out for themselves. Well, we might need a push in that direction. But
I don't know if the public have any questions, or how we have time.
We've got 1 minute 30 left.
Or if you don't, I can.
May I briefly? Are the candidates aware how dangerous it can be for trans people to be in what cis people may regard as the wrong toilet? It's terrible.
Well, it isn't very nice when you go into the wrong one anyway, as I have done on occasion.
If you had universal toilets, it wouldn't be.
Yeah, I couldn't agree.
That's right.
Yeah.
It can be embarrassing.
I'm not specifically aware of all the risks.
I'm going to be a bit careful not giving away sort of opinion.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's right, exactly.
How would you feel whether it is the ideal situation? Would you say there's any countries that do deal with it particularly well?
Well, I think that if you look at the likes of France, it's just all just one toilet. Because you get on with it.
Yeah.
Quite often it's one awful toilet.
But it's the same on trains, isn't it? And it's the same in lots of places.
The same on aircraft.
Yeah, exactly. So there shouldn't be a real problem.
Same at your own home, no? Nobody goes to the gender. Same at your own home, nobody
Yeah.
goes to a gendered toilet.
No.
Yeah.
An organisation that I'm involved with deal with gender neutral toilets, and that works.
Yes.
Nobody objects to it.
No.
You know, and it is an organisation that deals with a holistic
Stephen yet? That's fine. You can get me yeah. So, do you mind?
Yeah, my name is Adam Martel, independent candidate.
I'm Tina Berry. So I'm Eva from the campaign group Guerns Against Discrimination, which came together earlier this year to push for the anti-discrimination legislation and to raise awareness in the community of discrimination on the island. With the proposals now passed unanimously, it's imperative for us that the next elected candidates are dedicated to ensuring that the law is written and passed within the proposed timeline.
And I'm Lexi from Liberate, and we're going to ask you a question each.
Sure. So my question for you is, for the legislation to be effective, do you think people need to be informed and businesses need access to training?
Yeah, I write on my website about it actually that I do think an equality rights organisation is basically essential, because otherwise it's almost unenforceable, you know, and it's not really about enforcing, but it's about educating, and I think having an equality rights organisation would actually really help that rub point that we've potentially got with businesses, you know, if they see it as a support rather than a, you know, stick to beat them with. But yeah, absolutely behind the legislation. I've already said this evening one of my 5 reasons for standing, maybe 3, and the creation of Guerns Against Discrimination was probably one of the things that pushed me across the line in terms of standing, seeing a swell of engagement from not just the community but also young people.
Thank you.
Yeah, I support like educational tools for businesses. You know, just for get the acceptance that I think without it, there's still going to be people from businesses that don't really understand what we're trying to achieve. You know, everybody's got their own rights. We all need to be equals, and I think just be more accepting overall if we had that support and that extra reference tool and service.
Okay, and for my question then, so as we know, trans isn't one of the characteristics in there at the moment, but we know that it's pretty much going to come back at some point, and it's likely that it'll be in the next term. The question that I've got, in regards to the discrimination legislation, how will you respond to the challenge of trans people and single-sex spaces like toilets, refuge changing rooms as well as another one, and how will you look at that and legislate for that?
For me, like gender-neutral toilets are becoming more of a thing in business. We've got 5 or 6 key businesses on the island now that have them. We've got some fantastic pubs on the island, like JB Parkers and stuff that have gender-neutral toilets. I think in a modern-day society, it shouldn't matter. Everybody should be equal.
And where it's not neutral, how would you? Where it's not gender neutral toilets, how would you?
As long as there's cubicles, so there's a space for private space. It has to be cubicles. Shared wash areas. I think that would work. Big improvement.
I'm already the toilets queen. I've been asked a lot of times so far. So yeah, I mean, I'd obviously single-sex spaces to me, you should be going to the one that you identify with, as you do now. But I think you know, if people, it's going to be an ugly debate. We know that, but I mean, I will stand strong. Because it is something I believe in, and actually, you know, as we all know, the argument turns in on itself. And once you show people that, you know, you'd hope there's a bit of understanding. But going on to the, you know, I think gender neutral toilets, it might be the halfway house that we get to. I don't know. And I think if we brought in, and this is to get people over the line, not what I think. But I think if we could appeal to the fact that gender neutral toilets are actually very helpful for people with disabilities who might need assistance, or people single parents, I think we should be moving toilets in particular into cubicles that have everything enclosed. Because actually, if you've got a medical condition, or if, as a woman you're on your period, it can be pretty messy, and actually coming outside then to wash up isn't very nice. So I think those proposals that we could be putting in place as a compromise if we can't get people over the line.
Sorry, we've cut the sessions to a little bit shorter, so they're going to be 5-minute ones.
Oh, I'm Guerns.
I'm I'm Eva from the campaign group Guerns Against Discrimination, which came together earlier this year to push for the anti-discrimination legislation and to raise awareness in the community of discrimination in the island. With the proposals now passed unanimously, it's imperative for us that the next elected candidates are dedicated to ensuring that the law is written and passed within the proposed timeline.
And I am Netty from Liberate, and we're going to ask a question each.
So my question for you is, for the legislation to be effective, do you believe that people need to be informed and businesses need access to training?
Absolutely. The education piece has to be involved to not only what the adaptations and also all of the requirements of the law needs to be in parallel. We need to start before the draft ordinance comes through for approval. We also have a situation where we need the education, of course, on people's rights, what they're going to get, and bring everyone together, because we don't want it done us. So for me, it's probably the biggest part. We can let the law officers go on with the drafting of the ordinance and worry about how we make sure we bring us all together. There has been a little bit of a concern, for example, with business feeling they're not consulted enough. Sort of murmurings there, because they felt that they were out to get early doors. It wasn't really the case, but we need to really make sure that everyone comes in, because it's for the benefit of all of us. It will be for our economy as well as for our equality.
I almost want to ask the question: can you be sat here and actually say no?
Let's sort of lead on to like further dialogue.
Yeah. Well, no. I mean, of course, I'm fully on board with bringing that, and I think it needs to. It's not coming soon enough. I think there is still a lot of work to be done. I imagine with that, and I think it's absolutely crucial. And yes, I think education and informing the various stakeholders, knowing that people have rights, and then informing the employers, and perhaps getting the employers on board. Perhaps, I suppose. Is trying to also to encourage employers to come forward and say, well, we want to steer the lead on this, and we want to be the first ones to do this, and try to get that momentum, so actually they get on board. Well, some bigger companies, employers get on board, perhaps starting with the States of Guernsey.
That's a good start.
Yeah. By example.
Yeah. So regarding the discrimination legislation again. Trans as a protected characteristic isn't in there at the moment, but we know that it is going to come back at some point. And one of the biggest sticking points that always comes up is, in regards to the discrimination legislation, how will you respond to the challenge of trans people and single-sex spaces, for example, toilets, changing rooms, the refuge was one of the ones that were up, and how will we legislate for that, and how?
It is not only a difficult one in respect of the noise around it. We've got to get people to come on side. We're all equal, and we're all going to be treated equally. I don't know the answer, I must admit. As far as I'm concerned, I think it's the communication, and we've also got to make sure that, as far as I'm concerned, that you're happy, we're happy, everyone's happy with whatever we bring in, whatever the characteristics, and for me, that's, as I say, I don't know the solution.
Yeah, from what I can think of, it's just for the organisation I work, what we're down to have some gender-neutral toilets, but I think there is a rationale also for employers to be a little bit not accepting of such things, because there will be a cost attached to it, I suppose, in some extent. And where I work in school, the building is old and there are things that are outdated. But what we've tried to do is to have an hybrid approach. So we've got some gender-neutral toilets that some students can use if they feel that they want to go back. But it's a very hard one. It's about consultation and trying to make sure that
So it's suddenly become shorter.